So I was cleaning my room the other day, and by cleaning, I mean moving stuff around and pretending to be cleaning. I found this DVD in the middle of nowhere with no casing, covered in dust and with a bunch of scratches on the back. And I was suddenly thrown back to 2010 when I owned the entire first season of Big Time Rush, and I used to watch it all the time. I decided that I actually wanted to rewatch it since I was on furlough and I had a bunch of free time, and I thought what better way to spend my time than watching all 18 episodes of season 1 of Big Time Rush again, but 10 years later. I bought it on Amazon because this is only disc 2 and it only has like 4 episodes on it, and I wanted the full experience. So I paid actual money. I think it was something like 10 or 12 pounds. For some reason they're out of order in comparison to how they were apparently aired on Nickelodeon. I decided that there's no point just watching it. I need to choose my favourite. So I wanted to rank them, and I'm going to give you my rankings of every episode of Big Time Rush season 1. Big Time Rush is an actual band from what I know, but I didn't know that whenever I watched it, so clearly this very blatant marketing technique completely worked on me. It's a fictionalized version of the real life band. So it starts in Minnesota, where they are pretty much nobodies, and they get signed to a record contract, taken to LA, and the whole first season is just up to their debut and just all the crazy shenanigans that they get into. It's a pretty cheesy show. It did pretty well. I don't think the band is still together, I doubt it, and there was apparently 4 seasons. The band contains 4 members: Kendall, James, Logan, and Carlos. There's also Kelly and Gustavo. Gustavo is their record label producer and Kelly is his assistant, and then there's also Kendall's mum and his sister Katie who come with him to LA as well. There's other side characters, but anyway, let's get on to my list.
Dogs! I'm taking the rest of the day off. I'm starting to hate all of you.
Number 18, my least favourite, is Big Time Break. The boys are spending too much time together and they need a break from each other. Kendall decides to spend the day with the cute new girl that he likes, even though he thinks she has a boyfriend. Logan decides he wants to go to a math conference but realises that it's an all-girls lecture run by a sexist against men lecturer. Carlos's dad comes from out of town to help him find his stolen helmet, and James decides that he wants to become an actor and spends the day with other actress in the Palmwoods Hotel, Camille, and they go to an interview together. And that's the plot. So in premise, I actually like the idea of splitting the 4 of them up till this episode. They'd spent pretty much all of their time as a foursome, I guess, but I just don't know if some of the parts of the episodes age too well, and maybe that's just like that sensitive liberal mindset I have. But I just think that Kendall going after this girl that he thinks has a boyfriend and like insistently trying to flirt with her and then getting angry whenever he finds out that she doesn't have one, and then the Logan going to a lecture where they make fun of women hating men, which I wasn't sure if that was a parody or not, like whether it was a deliberate choice in order to make fun of the idea of hating other genders or if it was just like. And then Carlos's part was really simple. It kind of just felt like his dad came in and they like got into some wild shenanigans trying to find a helmet. James's part was actually the part of the episode that I liked. I liked that he wanted to branch his careers. I liked that he got to spend some time with Camille, who's usually focused on Logan. I thought that he actually grew a lot in this episode as well. So I only really liked one part of this episode, and overall it just wasn't my favorite.
The web is a powerful tool that can take BTR right to the top. And Deke is a powerful man.
Number 17, Big Time Blogger. Gustavo and Kelly decide to set up the boys with this pretty famous blogger who can basically make or break anyone's Hollywood careers. They have to go through intense training so they don't end up ruining it, but it ends up making them really stiff and awkward, so the blogger gets angry and wants to write a bad review. So they trap him in a closet, but he almost escapes and they have to try to convince him to change it to a good review before he manages to leave the hotel. For 2010, I think it's actually a pretty modern idea to have like a blogger, and it introduces with vlogging and stuff because it wasn't huge back then. But other than that, the rest of the episode is just pretty flat and generic. It's mostly just them running after a guy that doesn't like them, trying to convince him that they're good people, but it doesn't even spend enough time focusing on that to really earn the positive review they get at the end. Kelly and Gustavo in the whole episode have maybe a better plot, I don't know, because it's kind of short. Other than that, it's not a very exciting episode, and it just didn't feel like they'd earned the happy ending, which happens quite a bit in this show, but
our big time Hollywood party cred starts tonight. We start small, but you start hot.
Number 16, Big Time Party. Gustavo decides to throw a party for the studio execs to celebrate the Big Time Rush, but the boys aren't invited, so instead they decide that they're going to throw their own party, but they are on their last chance with the hotel manager bidders, so they have to try to do it secretly, but it ends up spiraling wildly out of control. Kendall is also trying to spend some time with his girlfriend, Jo, and basically find common ground with her, and Logan spends the whole party juggling two girls that like him. This episode is okay, but it's a little bit forgettable. I kept kind of forgetting that it existed, which isn't exactly the ideal situation for a TV show. I wasn't a huge fan of the Logan and the two girls plot, but I'm glad that he apologized at the end. It kind of felt like he grew a little bit from it. Kendall and Jo were fine. Carlos and James were basically paired together for the whole episode, and all they really did was just kind of party. The best part of the episode was Gustavo and Kelly, who were trying desperately to fix their really boring party and ended up having to crash the boys' one, but even that takes the first half of the episode to get to. It's not that exciting, and it just wasn't super fun. Because of the way it's ordered on Amazon, this was really the first episode that they ended up really splitting James and Carlos off as like the fun-loving children and Kendall and Logan as the slightly more mature but stupid teens, which I thought was quite interesting to just like randomly have that show up, whereas it does develop a little bit more naturally in the way that they actually ordered it on TV. So maybe that also structured into how I ordered it, because it just felt a little bit jarring.
Okay, now we panic.
Episode 15, Big Time Photo Shoot. This episode is ordered a little differently. I think they were trying something new with the structure. It's basically a flashback episode, which I give them props for, but it wasn't that good. So it opens with the boys and they're all beat up, and they have a picture in a popular teen magazine, and they tell the story of how they ended up getting beaten up while getting the picture. So they get an offer to be in the magazine, but just as they're about to take the photo, Kelly and Gustavo get arrested. Instead, the head of the company, Griffin, comes and he takes over the photo shoot, but his ideas are weird. It just ends up spiraling into a picture that they do not want to take, so they have to try to put off him taking the photo, and they're just making it weirder and weirder, and also try to sneak out and take their own photo where they're just normal guys. There's also a popular guy there who's meant to be a Zac Efron parody, and they get beat up at the end because they think he's in the room with them. So it's a little bit... This episode was kind of fun, but it was pretty average overall. I thought that seeing the photo shoots get weirder and weirder was actually quite funny, and I did like that we saw the boys team up and use their resourcefulness to get out of these situations and take their own photo, but it did get a little bit repetitive. It went on and on for like 4 or 5 versions of basically the same thing and then them running away, and Dax Evon, who is the Zac Efron, he kind of ages it a bit as well, so it was just a bit too average and repetitive really for me to put it any higher, but it wasn't a bad episode either.
And it's time you take responsibility for your actions by paying me back my $2,000!
Episode 14, Big Time Jobs. The boys pretty much ruin everything that they touch, which means that the company has to pay a lot of people for all the stuff they damage. Gustavo finally decides to punish them and makes them pay him back, which means that they all have to get jobs. A lot of the episodes they're split up again, but this one's a bit better executed. Carlos ends up being Gustavo's assistant, but he gets into a fight with a coffee machine that's broken. James wants to have a model job, but he gets a bit intimidated by all the other cute boys that are modeling. Kendall and Logan team up for this episode, which I actually quite liked because they're the more down-to-earth ones. They team up and they fail at a couple of jobs, and then they end up basically babysitting for a bunch of desperate mums because they're paying them a lot, but looking after kids is pretty hard and it just spirals wildly out of control. This episode was pretty average, but it was decent. I did enjoy parts of it. I was actually quite glad that the boys finally got some form of like negative punishment, I guess, for their antics, because usually it's more laughed off. I did think that Carlos drew the short straw again. It seems that any time that they ever really part ways, he always gets the most simple and kind of more dull part of the episode, which kind of sucks because he can be kind of fun. But I did enjoy that Kelly came and helped him beat up a sexist coffee machine. James's story is kind of similar to the one in Big Time Break that I liked, but he does have a little bit more doubt in this one, and he teams up with Katie, Kendall's sister, instead, and he does end up getting a job in the end, but it's not the one he wanted. But I thought it was nice to see him accept that it's still a job. Kendall and Logan played off each other pretty well as the more like realistic and mature parts of the group. Their part of the episode was also pretty weird, and they don't know how to look after kids, and like that's pretty difficult to do. I'm also pretty sure that they exploited those children for child labor, but we're not going to really get into that one. This was also the return of Freight Train, who is Gustavo's like bodyguard assistant, I guess, and I just really like Freight Train, so I was glad to see him come back. This also wasn't an episode that had like a perfect happy ending like a lot of the episodes do. It kind of ended on a slightly more realistic note, which I liked, but it's still not the best episode ever, so that's why it's down here.
Because you can't stop the Wayne Wayne train. Stop this, it's not cool.
Episode 13, Big Time Bad Boy. Basically, Griffin decides that the band needs a bad boy in order to sell more records, and he wants it to be Kendall. He says no. The other boys decide to fight it out because the bad boy's usually the more popular and rich person of the band, but they're not very good at it, so Griffin decides instead to place a fifth member into the group. This is Wayne Wayne. He's not very nice, and the boys basically decide that they want to get rid of him, but they're gonna have to force him out. He decides that he does not like Kendall because Kendall is the leader of the other four, and decides that he's going to try to kick Kendall out of the band. They basically need to prove that they don't need Wayne Wayne in the band before he gets Kendall out. This episode was a little bit slow to start with, but I think it had a pretty good tone overall. It had some pretty fun moments in it as well. I did love seeing Bad Boy Kendall at the end. He was such a 2010 teen emo dreamboat. Loved that for him. I also really liked that Gustavo was actually working with them in the end. It sort of added more depth to his character for really the first time, and I also liked that Kelly got a bit more of a personality. This was really the first episode where she showed that, at least in the way Amazon structured it. This episode also has like a really wild subplot. Like the mom thinks that the maintenance man is an axe maniac, and it's like sort of to prove that you don't judge people whenever you first meet them, but they pretty much judged Wayne Wayne whenever they met him. It worked out well in the end. It was a pretty happy ending again, but it was actually quite a fun episode, so I feel like we're getting to the slightly above average episodes. These next three were extremely hard to place because I thought that they all were pretty much the same.
So, you need to find a theme, snacks, decorations, chaperones, and we have no money, no place to have it, and since today's the last day of school, we need to have it tonight.
12. Big Time Dance. The Palmwood School has never had a dance before, so the boys decide that they're going to organise one, but they have to do it in one day. I wouldn't say this is a particularly special episode, but it was better than Big Time Party, and I did actually enjoy some parts of it as well. Kendall decides to try to focus on planning, but he accidentally keeps blowing off Joe. Carlos tries to get a date with one of the Jennifers, who are the popular cool girls, but they turn him down, but in the end they have to come to him and make him pretend to be other famous boys so that they'll agree to go with him. Logan decides he wants to ask Camille, the actress of the Palmwoods. He needs help from James to gather the confidence to actually ask her out because she can be a little bit intimidating. James spends most of the episode just being there. He doesn't really do much except accidentally ask too many girls to the dance, and that's really it. But it was nice to see him support Logan a bit. It was a pretty fun episode, but it wasn't like anything too in-depth. It was all pretty surface level. We got some Logan and Camille development, and I actually quite liked this one. I feel like this was their best episode together. They actually were both interested in each other in this episode, and Logan went through a lot of effort to try to impress her and make her happy. I also liked that Carlos finally got some time, and he sort of grew from agreeing to pretend to be other people so that the girls would like him to going with a girl that actually liked him for who he was. And then Kendall basically is just trying to plan the dance. There's also one joke where Logan is looking at places to throw the dance and they make a joke about the murder district in LA, and I was like, This is a pretty upbeat kids show aimed at like 10-year-olds, and I was pretty shocked to have that joke like randomly just thrown in, but I was like paying attention after that, I will tell you that much. This episode had some pretty fun parts, but I'd say overall it was more or less okay, and it was slightly more forgettable than the ones I've ranked above it, which is why it ranked at number 12.
We knocked Jordan Sparks down a well. Nobody panic. I'm sure that Jordan is fine. I wish that Jordan is okay. Oh, she's okay.
11. Big Time Sparks. So Jordan Sparks is in this episode. Basically, Jordan Sparks arrives at the Palm Woods in order to record her new single at Rock Records with Gustavo. The boys are excited to see her, but told to stay away by Gustavo because they pretty much ruin everything that they touch. And a lot of the episode is just them following her around and bad stuff happening. There's like a side plot where Joe gets jealous of her. I didn't really love that part. And then they fall down a well and they sing together, and then they release a single together. Gustavo has an enemy named Hawk now, and he basically sends a skunk to Gustavo's place so that Jordan will have to come record her single at his studio, is the side plot. I honestly do not think I've ever seen this episode before. It's a little bit basic. It's not the most exciting episode, but I actually thought it was relatively even throughout. It didn't really have any bad moments. It had a couple of fun moments and lots of antics in it. I thought Jordan actually acted pretty well, and she was incorporated into the story and the world pretty well as well. The skunk side plot was fine. Kelly and Gustavo had a couple of fun jokes, but it was a little bit weird. Something that I did like was the song and the music video that they made for the song. A lot of the times in the episodes they'll debut a new song, which I imagine was actually debuting in real life. I just didn't know that. I actually like this song probably one of the best of all of season 1 because it's so different to any other song that they made. It's a lot more like of an R&B ballad compared to the more upbeat pop songs that they would tend to sing, and I thought it actually suited all of them and their voices really well. And the music video was really simple in comparison to some of the wild music video concepts they have in the show. So I like the song, and I think that's actually probably what booted it above the last one. So
That's the guy I'll be. Turn myself upside down. Yes, I will. I will. I'm gonna do it.
10. Big Time Love Song. The boys are desperate for a cute, normal girlfriend in comparison to all the weird ones at the Palm Woods, but luckily for them, a cute new girl moves in. Her name is Jo. They all decide that they like her and they need to compete for her attention, and they want to win, so some pretty wild stuff happens. There's also a bit where James has an allergic reaction to a man spray as well. Gustavo is struggling to write the love song that the company wants for Big Time Rush, so he's off there trying to write a love song that is actually good, and the boys are trying to compete for Joe's affections, and sometimes James is in the hospital because of his reaction. Technically, I'm not quite sure how much higher this should be than Sparks or The Dance, but I actually enjoyed this one just the tiniest bit more. I like seeing them all compete. I liked their antics. I really liked the random subplot where James was obsessed with Barracuda Man spray. It was nice to see the Palm Woods again and the people in it. And I quite liked the Gustavo subplot where he has to try to write a song, but Katie's also there, and then he has to like go experience life so that he can be inspired for a new song. Overall, it wasn't maybe like the best episode, but it was quite fun to watch, and I just kind of enjoyed it. Also, why were they cavemen in that video?
Underwater farts are impossible to achieve at water pressure in excess of 4.2 pounds per square inch. What? It's basic fartology.
9, halfway there. Big Time Mansion. Gustavo has to go out of town for work and needs people to look after his mansion, and he's left with no other choice but the boys, who promise that they're mature and will look after it perfectly, but they instantly break all of his rules because they're children. He has also managed to find a really perfect boy band who listen to him and do everything he says, but part of him misses the more rebellious nature of the boys. Basically, they accidentally ruin everything in his mansion, and they need to try to fix it before he gets back and fires them. I'm pretty sure I saw this episode like at least 30 times whenever I was younger, and it opens with a fart joke, which is just peak levels of comedy, but it did actually have some fun jokes. It had a lot of fun stuff happening, at least. It was maybe more of the more weird and wild episodes, like there was a cat spray painting, stuff like that. It plays a little bit more with the perception of reality in this episode. It was fun to watch them completely ruin everything and then desperately try to fix it. I like that Kendall, despite being this mature 16-year-old, actually had to rely on his mum to come save the day. I really liked the fact that they showed that in a TV show, that it's still cool to call on your mum for help. It kind of wraps up in a neat little bow, but also like they probably did get in trouble at the end, which I did enjoy. And overall, I think that it's a pretty fun episode. It's got some good moments and it's like really weird at points as well. So I did like it, and that's why it's here. Oh, and the song was pretty good as well, I think.
We'll just put everybody in the background as extras or something.
Yeah, that is acting, right?
Episode 8, Big Time Video. Big Time Rush is getting their first music video just in time for pretty much everyone at the Palmwoods to be told that they have to go home by their parents because they haven't booked a job in a long time. The boys basically promise everyone they can be in the music video, but Gustavo says no, so they have to try to film a fake version to show the other people's parents that they can stay, but it just goes wildly wrong because it's 4 16-year-olds who have no idea what they're doing. They have to try to get a proper music video filmed in order to help save everyone and also make the music video that they want to make. I'm pretty sure that this episode was just written to really match the level of stupidity that I love in my humour, so this was probably one of the funnier episodes for me, at least, but plot-wise it was pretty good, but like not the best. It was maybe a bit simple, so it does wrap up in a pretty little bow, which does feel a bit like a quick fix, but it's not as bad as some of the others because it did sort of show how hard the boys were working to try to fix all the problems for the other people, so I feel like they actually had earned it a bit more than other episodes. The music video and the song was pretty good at the end, although it was like really generic mid-2000s teen music video, but it was so nice to see that again. I would describe this episode as like good, fun, but pretty simple. Episodes 7 and 8 were pretty close in the rankings.
I'm sorry, who are you?
Mercedes Griffin, as in your boss's daughter. A clayback, Joss. Living large here is about to start groveling.
7, Big Time Demo. The boys' dream could be over if Griffin's secret liaison does not choose them as the next big thing. Luckily, his daughter arrives just on time to pick up their demo to send it to her dad. They basically realize that she's very close to him, so she must be the secret liaison, and they have to try to convince her that they are worth choosing. So she sees an opportunity here and basically manipulates them the whole episode, making them into her boyfriends and making them do stuff for her. At the end, they basically find out it's a chimp that chooses the record, and she actually comes to help them try to kidnap it, which goes horribly wrong, but in the end they do end up getting chosen anyway, so like, and you knew this because it's halfway through the series. It'd be a pretty bad TV show if that was the end of the show. This is a pretty fun episode. It's maybe not too special technically, but I actually really enjoyed seeing Griffin's daughter. I felt like she was really manipulative and fun because usually a lot of the characters are a lot more like wild and random and like positive, so it was nice to see a more negative character have some time on screen. Unfortunately, she did repent pretty quick and it wrapped up in a nice little bow again, but the song was pretty decent. I think Halfway There was one of my favourite songs whenever I was younger, so maybe that's another reason why that's also up here.
Here's the plan. Number 1, I'm gonna go back to the studio. 2, you guys get Gustavo back to the mansion and make sure he writes a song and solve everything.
Right. Wait, what?
Episode 6, Big Time Terror. There's kind of two plots in this episode. One of them is about a ghost, the other's about Gustavo. Obviously those things go hand in hand, so that makes sense. There's apparently a ghost at the Palmwoods, so Carlos and Logan team up in order to escape Gustavo to prove and disprove the existence of ghosts. Gustavo's moved in with him while his mansion floods and he's annoying everyone because he's acting like a massive child, and eventually Kendall and James decide that they have to try to get him to leave. They try a couple of things but nothing works, and in the end the four have to work together as a team to get rid of the ghost and also to get rid of Gustavo. On the level of plot, I feel like it's very similar to Demos, like it's nothing too special, but I actually like the humor in this one a fair bit more than Demos, which is why it was above it. I really liked seeing Gustavo act like a kid. I really enjoyed seeing Kendall and James desperately try to get him out of their house. The ghost plot was fine, but a little bit weird. But I did enjoy the Scooby-Doo style chase. I also remember that I actually really liked the James and Kendall duet of Snore in the Dark, and I really liked the official version of the song that came at the end of the episode as well. So this episode was pretty fun, and teamwork saved everything in the end, and I thought that the song was pretty good, so that's why it's so high up the list.
This place is horrible.
Episode 5, Big Time Crib. This is the first episode on Amazon for some reason, I don't know why. It does serve as a sort of okay introduction to the characters, but compared to the pilot, which is supposed to be the first episode, no. The boys' apartment at the Palmwoods is a dump and they want to get a nicer one. Luckily, Griffin happens to have an entire set of this cool teen hangout that he wants them to film a promotional video for the head of the studio in Japan. So they decide to work together with the kids at the Palmwoods and basically lie to get it built in their apartment. And that's mostly the plot of the episode. I feel like maybe this episode is so high because it was the first episode and I was just really excited to watch Big Time Rush again. I do think it's a pretty decent episode. It's pretty fun, but it's a little simple, but I don't necessarily mind that because even though it was simple, it did most of it well, and that's really what matters. The episode is quite over the top, but everyone has a role and they all do it well, and I thought that it had some good moments. I liked that there was almost a bad ending to it almost, but we saw a nicer side of Gustavo and we saw that their relationship was developing. It did end up happy, but like not in this fairy tale way. It was kind of not over the top at the end, I guess. So I'd say this episode, it's pretty okay. Maybe it shouldn't be number 5 on the list because I'm sure that some of the other episodes were maybe a little bit better, but I was just excited to watch the show again and I liked it, so...
New plan. Kendall! You're going solo.
No way.
Episode 4, Big Time Fever. It's the height of summer, and James seems to be changing. The boys have to try to fix James back to his normal self before he goes all the way Hollywood. But along the way, Carlos and Logan also fall victim to being Hollywoodized, and Kendall has to try to help his friends before they go full Hollywood and they're lost to him forever. This episode actually has a fair bit of similarities to Big Time Love Song, especially with the James plot, where his obsession with Barracuda Man Spray and his obsession with Barracuda Body Tan. But I think I like this episode because we finally got to see the boys act a bit different for once. It was nice to see them sort of break out of the mold. Not Kendall, because Kendall's the straight man of the show and he's pretty much always the same sort of generic main character, which I like. That's not a bad thing, but I do kind of wish Kendall had changed a little bit, even for like one scene, just to sort of see that. That would have been quite fun. I quite liked the personalities that they had. They were so over the top. I quite like the friendship will save everything in the end message, I guess. It was a little bit cheesy, but the whole show is a bit cheesy, so I quite like this one. I think this episode handled the more cheesy nature of it quite well. And it also had one of my favourite jokes, which was the "you're going solo." It had a couple of like spoof action scenes with the water guns that they were trying to attack James with, which I loved. It's like that in the Scooby-Doo one. I like it whenever they parody other genres as well. I think they do that quite well. I think one of the reasons I liked this episode so much was because it really felt like they were acting like real teenage people who were stuck in Hollywood and almost got taken in by this like trying to change yourself to be more popular and more famous attitude. I really liked seeing them act like normal teenagers with each other as well at the end, and Katie had a decent side plot too with like her snow cone business as well, so that's why this episode's so high, because it was actually a really enjoyable one.
First up, we have probabilities. As in the probability that this band will fail before its first single is ever released!
Episode 3, Big Time School of Rock. Being a pop trainee is not all it's cracked up to be because the boys still have to go to school, but unfortunately it's not to the cool looking hotel school where all their friends go. It's to a supply closet in the studio because it's cheaper that way, and Gustavo wants them to constantly be there and also not have to spend much money on them. They basically have to like get rid of all of their teachers so that they can go back to the school that they want to go to. This actually used to be my favorite episode whenever I was younger, and I got like such happy flashbacks whenever I was watching it, so maybe that's also why it's so high up on the list, because I'm a little bit biased towards it. I think it's actually also like a really fun episode. Like, it's really childlike, but like the show's for kids, so that's always going to factor into how I rate things. It was quite fun watching the boys figure out new ways to get rid of all of their teachers, especially Mr. Smitty, who I have actually grown into with my pessimism, but unfortunately I'm not part of a man band in Germany. The pacing of this episode was actually really good. I noticed that whenever I watched it, except for maybe a couple of the dream sequences. The vomit joke wasn't my favourite as an adult. Like, the jokes were pretty good. I really liked some of the characters. I thought that it worked really well, and I really like that at the end they managed to beat Gustavo at his own game by playing so hard by the rules that he got angry. I really like seeing them use their brain instead of just like getting into some crazy shenanigans like randomly that will just sort of work out in their favor. This was also the episode where I just thought they used that random comedy effect that they just constantly have everything that they need to make the scene funny, like how they just randomly have a water cooler outside of Gustavo's office door and he didn't notice them put it there. Like, this happens throughout the show, that they'll just like randomly have a paintbrush or like randomly have a fan or whatever whenever they need it, even though it makes no sense for them to have it. But I really liked how they used that in this episode. I just thought that overall in this episode they have some of the best characterization, it's a pretty good plot, and a lot of the comedy is actually like really good in this episode. Like, for kids, that's why this episode is that high, and it's still one of my favorites.
We've always promised since we were Pee Wee hockey players that we would stick together. Ooh, and you've never broken a promise? We might be horrible people.
Number 2, Big Time Concert. So this is the season 1 finale, and it has a long plot because it's a double length special episode, so I'll just try to summarize it like really quick. Basically, the boys are going to get a concert, but then they get told that their division of the studio is no longer active, so they have to go home to Minnesota. Gustavo has to stay behind, like work on audiobooks, which he doesn't want to do. Kendall basically encourages the others to give up on being a boy band and instead go back to their more realistic dreams, but that just makes James angry because he still wants to be a boy band. He still wants to be a pop star. That's always been his dream. He gets an offer from Hawk and decides to go back to LA with Hawk and record as a solo artist, but Gustavo, who has now sold his mansion in a desperate attempt to buy back the rights to Big Time Rush because he does love them, has come back to take them back to LA, but it is just the 3 of them now. They have to try to get James to join, but he doesn't want to, so they have to try to replace him, but that doesn't work, and then eventually James comes back to the band because he doesn't quite like how it is being a solo artist and he misses his friends. They have to try to do their own concert, but that means they need to try to get investors, so they have to use all their friends at the Palmwoods to help them advertise the show so that people will come and investors will come, but then they get kidnapped by Hawk, and then they have to try to escape being kidnapped and get to their concert in time so that they can prove that they're worth supporting, and then they perform at the end. It's a pretty wild episode, but like, it's double length, so I actually think that they managed to fit a lot of stuff in and it doesn't feel like too crazy paced. It actually feels like pretty good. Something else that I actually really liked was that the first 5 episodes of the whole episode feel like a really condensed version of the pilot. I think it was really fun, and it was actually a really good wrap up to the whole show because it did a lot of callbacks, especially to the first episode, so it really did feel like the whole series sort of circled, and it was really nice to see them actually work towards their debut and work with their friends that they'd made along the way to try to make it possible for them to debut. It was kind of weird that Hawk kidnapped children. I liked seeing their friendship in this episode. I think that this episode actually managed to have like a really good tone to it. I think it had a really good sense of drama and like danger for the boys, that their dream might be over, they might not be able to debut, and like you were really like on their side hoping that they managed to do everything. It felt like a movie, and I think that that really worked. So I think this was actually probably one of the stronger episodes, only beat out by number 1, the pilot.
Give James the helmet. We gotta protect the face.
Right. I love you guys.
Time in.
Big time audition. Kendall, Logan, James, Carlos. They're 4 friends from Minnesota, and James really wants to be a pop star. Gustavo and Kelly have just arrived in Minnesota to try to find the next big thing. They're after a soloist. James manages to see the ad on TV just in time to get there. The boys actually all end up signing up to audition because Kelly is desperate because Gustavo has literally turned down hundreds of people in this journey. So Logan and Carlos audition, but it goes really bad. And then eventually James auditions and Gustavo does not like him, but that sends Kendall into a rage because his friend is talented. So he goes and he basically makes a scene in front of Gustavo, and then the rest join in and they get kicked out. Gustavo actually follows them to Kendall's house and actually pitches Kendall a record deal because he thinks Kendall has the fire. Kendall says no because he doesn't really want to be a singer even though he kind of enjoys it, but the boys think he's stupid. So he reads between the lines there and basically tells Gustavo the only way he will come with him to LA is if he is part of a band and his friends can come with him. Gustavo is desperate and agrees, and then we follow them to LA. They move into the Palm Woods, they meet all the other people, they start to do like a boy band boot camp, which they're all pretty bad at except James, but like Gustavo doesn't like James that much. He thinks he doesn't have like the fire. They need to try to impress Griffin or else they'll be sent back home and Gustavo will probably have to get a different job. Eventually they decide that it's actually worth putting some time and effort into because it really could be fun trying to be a boy band, and they put in some hard work and they get sent on their merry way towards a demo. Now, for some reason, this is episode 17 on Netflix, and I think maybe they put it there because it's a double length episode as well, but like, it's the first episode, surely that should be the first one I see. I think that this episode actually set up the plot, the story, the world, and the characters like really well. The characters are like a little bit one-dimensional, caricature style, but it does work because it sort of sums up what their character is for the rest of the show. It's just a bit more simplified, but I think that for the first episode that's like quite forgivable because you're hardly going to explore your entire character's backstory in 25 minutes. I think as well this was my favourite episodes for how the boys interacted with each other. I think that their friendship in this episode felt like really genuine and real compared to some of the other episodes which can be maybe a little bit more dramatized. This episode felt a lot more realistic. The rest of the show sort of takes on a bit more of like a dreamy, wild, random route. The humor as well is still quite like random, but compared to the later episodes I feel like it was also played down a bit, and I actually really like it. I liked having the more grey tone of Minnesota and how the boys felt more real and how it just felt a little bit more down to earth. I really enjoyed this episode. I kind of wish that the rest of the season had been a little bit more like this, but I still enjoyed what we got. As you can tell, even the episodes that I didn't like much, I still said were pretty good because they're just like bad but cheesy, but like kind of good. But overall, I think that this episode was a really good way to open the show, and I think it was their most fun episode. I think it was the best paced and the best plot, and I really enjoyed this episode, so I completely recommend you watching episode 1 of the show. So this show is made for kids, so it does have a childish sense of humor to it, but like obviously I still enjoyed it though. Like, I'm not a child, but I still thought that there were parts of it that were really funny, and I really like the childlike glee that a lot of it has. You kind of have to go into it knowing it's going to be a show for kids and it's going to be cheesy and stupid. If you go in like that, I think that you'll still enjoy it a lot. It's kind of aged a little bit, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think most of the episodes are still pretty good. And like some of these episodes are genuinely good, like the pilot and the last one are actually like pretty good episodes, like even just on their own I think they're actually like pretty good to this day. I think as well, even just rewatching it made me kind of like happy, and it was like a nice sense of joy. I'm really tempted to buy and watch season 2 because I'm pretty sure I've never seen it. I kind of just want to like continue this journey and see how it improves and gets better. At least I hope it improves and gets better. I liked most of the episodes. Even the ones that were on the lower part of my list, I still enjoyed parts of. I think that the last 4 or 5 are like really good episodes and are worth watching. I completely recommend watching episode 1 if you're at all interested in the show. Also, I mean, like, let me know if you've watched Big Time Rush and if you agree with my rankings or not, and tell me why. But like, we all agree that the pilot is the best episode though. You can't fight me on that one. And so those are my rankings. That's it for today. Bye.